Hello, everybody. It's 𝗤𝘂𝗍𝗆 Eisenhower. I'm joined by a very special guest that has just so much information to share, has had quite the life journey. His name is Seth 𝗵𝗲 Pruzansky. And I first want to say hello to you before I tell everybody a little bit about you. Thanks for joining me.
Oh, thank you, Laura. Thank you for having me.
Yes, my pleasure. So yeah, let me tell you a little bit about him. Seth was born into this world with the ability to interpret deeply profound universal wisdom directly from his soul. Throughout the course of his life, he has learned how to masterfully articulate this knowing in a way that benefits those who are desperately looking for real answers to the big questions in life. Seth is a self-published author of the book, The Fight to Enlight. Initiation through the heart is the only way to win. A successful entrepreneur, performing musician, co-founder of livingnuts.com, tourmalinesspring.com, and editor of the blog 𝗦𝘂𝗶𝗆𝗀𝗆.com, a website devoted to globally awakening people to the power residing in their own consciousness. And so that's amazing that you've done all that. But I think what's amazing as well, I don't want to overly use the word amazing because you're one of those people that just has such an incredible story. I want to just share a little bit about some of the trials and tribulations and adversities that you've gone through, and then I will jump into some questions. Does that sound okay?
Sounds great. Absolutely.
Okay, so the great collective wake-up call is not collective, it's personal. And this is a huge theme that Seth frames his work around. Basically, everything that almost everybody is experiencing collectively from a mental, emotional, and spiritual level as a result of the pandemic, Seth has gone through personally in his own life. Through severe bullying as a child, deadly drug addiction in his early 20s, a decade-long chronic illness, 3 years in prison, and countless near-death experiences throughout his entire life, he has learned to develop a level of resiliency that is both rare but completely possible for anyone to activate and cultivate within themselves. As a result of all of this, he has developed the internal tools, skills, and resources to overcome any trial, tribulation, or setback. He calls these personal occurrences initiations. Essentially, they are divine events that are encouraging us to discover our own greatness, connection to source, and the infinite possibilities that such exploration represents for us as individuals and as a species. So this is just like my favorite kind of stuff because I love to embrace adversity as our friend. And I love that you use the word initiation. And so I just kind of want to start with this question. So as a result of the global pandemic, many people are experiencing fears, feelings, and states of being that they probably never felt before, especially because it's reverberating and affecting everybody across the planet, right? And this is causing many to have major anxiety about the future. It's supposed to feel this way. And this is what you're saying. So let's delve into that. So at this point, it is only by being pushed into our fears that we're able to face them, move beyond it, and create a new expression of reality that may have never existed before. So much of this is in his words as something that we can really dive into. So why don't we start there? And especially the point of it's supposed to feel this way, because I think some people are feeling victimized and very resentful of what's going on.
Yeah. And they have every right to be. And that's the first initial reaction we're going to have, because in order to truly grow beyond the limitations that hold us back and into the possibilities and potentials that are truly innate within our own self-awareness, we have to face those uncomfortable stages, those fears, those ugly things that we don't want to face. And when we first start facing it, we're going to be facing it from a human perspective, from a perspective that we're most used to perceiving reality from, which is our human identity that has been conditioned and fashioned throughout the course of this life. So we're naturally going to go through these steps of, oh my God, why is this happening? Why is this happening to me? I thought I had freedom. I thought that, life was supposed to be like this. We have all these expectations based upon the way things have always been. And when those get shattered, suddenly we're left looking at things in a way that is perplexing to us. And we feel like victims, and it's totally natural and okay to feel like that. But the difference, and this is what separates people, this is where they define themselves, is if they choose to remain in a state of victimization, or if they are so willing and devout in their willingness to face that, move beyond it, and see what that victimization actually is, because it's quite surprising what it really is.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So yeah, this great collective wake up that we're in, going back to it being personal, not collective, like you're meaning the personal initiations are a part of the collective, but we're not really able to just experience it on a collective level without taking it upon ourselves personally, or else we're not really doing the work, right? So
there's many paradoxes, right? There's many different ways of perceiving reality that can lead us further away from our source, but it's in recognizing that we're able to let go of these different perceptions. And ultimately it comes down to us as individuals taking full responsibility for how we perceive the circumstances in and around our life. And when we do that, when we're truly like, okay, you know what? It's not about the government. It's not about my neighbor. It's not about China. It's not about any of that. All the ugliness, all the bitterness, all the things that I don't like perceiving in this world that are making me feel awful. What if that is a part of my own perception that I have not been able to face because I've been functioning at such a limited level compared to what I'm capable of functioning at? And when we take responsibility for reality in that radical, intense kind of way, things begin to happen. Our own perception of reality begins to expand. Right now, we are in a part of the solar system and a part of the universe that is expanding. Most of life is in an expansive state. It's not contracting. So human perception, on the other hand, though, is in a stagnant or contractive state of being that is going directly against the laws of what is primarily happening. So that can only go on for so long without reality smacking us around, or waking us up. So when that happens, then we find that this static or contracted state of perception that we're living in is not reality. It's a temporary, illusory state that, because so many of us believe it to be true, we're giving it the appearance of a temporary reality. And hey, if everybody's doing it, it's normal, it's real, it's just what is, right? No, it's only like that from a very limited perspective, from a temporary, it's a blip in time. So as we expand our awareness, as we expand our heart and trust that even though we don't like what's happening, it is somehow for our greatest good, then this energy that we truly are, that is gifting us the opportunity to be in these bodies to begin with, comes to our assistance, and it helps us to get through whatever fear, whatever darkness, whatever it is that we don't like, and it gives us resolution.
Well, take us into an example of what you went through with 3 years in jail and being confined. People feel somewhat imprisoned, and there you are with all these forces controlling you, telling you what to do, giving you orders. It's very similar to, this whole concept of being enslaved and being further enslaved, and what vaccines might do, and being in lockdown, not able to go out for more than an hour in some places like Victoria, Melbourne. So a person who might be sitting in that situation, let's kind of speak to that. But I'd first like to hear about your process and some of these things that you went through in your earlier years.
We could go on forever about this, but yeah, so essentially we have this illusion of freedom, most of us, right? Living in the modern civilized world, we believe that we're free. I mean, depending on where the world we are, some places know that they're definitely not free, but most of us have this belief that we're free, but we're only free to a certain extent. Now, when something as dramatic as what happened to me happens, where you get extracted from the free reality you think you're living in and put into a place where you find out that you're not free, you're quickly facing parts of yourself that, as I said before, make you feel like a victim, that make you feel like, oh my God, what is really happening? So I recognized right away that this is what was happening to me. And I felt like the biggest victim there was for a little while. You know, I'm in a place with people that you would mostly cross the street to get away from, that you don't want to be with, you know, being told what to do by people who don't have your best interest at heart necessarily. And the feeling of it, especially to somebody who's really sensitive, is tremendously heavy and burdensome. So I recognized right away that, oh my God, like, okay, here's what's happening in my reality now. And because this is what's happening in my reality now, I never really was free before. And that I was actually living in a prison, a mental, emotional, and especially a spiritual prison, long before I was physically incarcerated. But it took for me being physically incarcerated before I could truly grab the scope, truly perceive the scope and the gravity of what that meant. So then it was like, okay, if I've been in a prison of my own perceptual creation before any of this, then what does freedom actually mean? What does it look like? What would I have to do to actually experience freedom, if it even exists at all? And then began a process. You know, I did a few different things, but ultimately it was a process of meditation. But more specifically, it was a state of being that is heart-brain coherence. It's being in coherence with the energy that is animating the human body, that's causing the heart to beat, that's gifting us the opportunity to perceive reality through these human senses. And so I found that the more I was focused on the world around me, the more I felt like a victim. But the more I would train myself to perceive this internal energy that was causing my heart to beat, the less of a victim I felt, and the more in tune with reality as it actually is, I felt. And so it really just became like a common sense kind of thing. It's like, okay, if I get caught up in perceiving the world around me, it hurts. It doesn't feel right. But if I just keep bringing my attention back to this energy that's here, that's causing my heart to beat, that's causing these mind-blowing, incomprehensible anatomical and physiological reactions to take place in my body faster than the speed of light, then not only do I start to feel better, but I start to become aware of things at a level that I wasn't previously aware of in my normal victimized state of being. But here's the interesting thing is the things that you become aware of when you're in a state of personal coherence, they might seem like revelations when you first start to perceive them. It might be like, oh my God, but they're just universal truths that are flowing through everybody. They're in everything, they're in everybody, and it's always been there. But we, in our limited, narrow lens of our perception of reality, just weren't able to see them because we've accepted the density of this reality as normal. And because everybody around us accepts it as normal, we just like, that's it, that's real, that's what's going on. But when we attune ourself, our perception of reality, to this coherence, to this rhythmic beating that is happening inside of us, oh my God, everything changes.
Right. So when you started to have those breakthroughs, which are part of, a truth, not just a concept that comes and goes. I mean, it's life altering, right? There was really no turning back, I'm sure, once the ball got rolling. What did you notice about your outer reality shift in the face of that?
That's a great question because, in many ways, I'll liken that experience to like going into the jungle, right? You're put into a jungle, you're around wild animals that want to eat you. Like they literally want to destroy you. But I noticed that the more I would get into these states of being, the more I would entrain my perception of reality, my brain waves, my heart waves, my energy field to be in alignment with this coherence that is animating my life experience. The people around me couldn't help but treat me differently. They couldn't help but respond differently. And the worst of them, the guys that were like just, you know, just the worst of the worst, suddenly become like little kids with innocence in their eyes, with awe, with wonder, because it's tapping into a part of them that was always there, but they just didn't see it because there was so much trauma, there's so much pain, there's so much conditioning that was preventing them from being able to perceive the reality of what they actually are. But when they begin to feel it, then suddenly they're not in that limited, contracted, I think I know what reality is state. You're in this open, augmented, and expansive state of reality where you realize that you barely know anything about what's going on. However, you are a part of it, and you can feel how grateful you are to be a part of that. And so you're engaged, you're present, you're right there, and you're willing to face the unknown. And that's how they responded to me.
And that's such an incredible point, that when we shift within ourselves, that's why it's a personal, that's why I love your title about the wake up call is not collective, it's personal, because as you were shifting, others around you were shifting. So that outer metaphor, like you were talking about, where it's kind of this outer reflection of things we didn't realize we were in, when you began to break those barriers, it's almost like the outer world is an aspect of you that changed with you. Is that kind of how you would say it?
Who would believe it, right? Who would ever think that? Like, we're so addicted to perceiving reality according to the way we've always perceived it. And so we've given so much validity to the material appearance of the world around us that we don't want to believe it could be another way, because we're literally addicted to believing it's that way. But it's through that addiction that we perpetuate this dense reality and give it more life and allow it to keep being the way it is, when really we don't recognize that if we could just break that addiction by cutting it right off, by saying, you know what, I might not know what this is or why it's happening, but I know there's something greater. I know that within me is something that is beyond comprehension. And I'm going to allow that aspect of myself to take over, to break through everything that is holding me back. And when we commit to that energy, you know, that was how I did it, but everybody's going to commit to it or find their own connection to it or their own relationship to it. But when we do that and we find our own relationship to it and we commit to it, we prioritize it, oh my God, the world around us dissolves. Like, this is not what it appears to be, you know, and what it really is suddenly starts coming into view.
Do you really feel, though, that people who carry a lot of light are going to get attacked for whatever reason? Do you think maybe it's too polarized towards the light and the attack is to help them to find maybe the shadow? Like, I mean, what would you say in the face of what might seem to be a very positive person, light orientated, who, you know, is attacked, or like an empath being with a narcissist kind of thing, where it doesn't seem like that makes sense because it's not an outer reflection?
Yeah, absolutely. It's always going to be like that. But again, what layers and levels are we talking about? Because it's only like that within certain layers and levels and dimensions of perception. But when we're truly committed to this, when we're truly like, I don't care what it takes, like I am going to be what I know I have the potential to be, even if I can't consciously comprehend what that is. When we do that, then we break through the barriers and the limitations that keep these lower polarized energies enslaved and quote unquote attacking us. And even when they attack us, even when these things happen, this is that greater force that is trying to get our attention any way it can. And look what happens to most people. You know, I've been targeted, you could say. I've been attacked like a million times throughout my life. And my initial response, which is totally natural and which is what most people do, is to retract in fear, to feel like a victim, to feel like something's out to get me. Of course, that's our natural reaction. That's what we're going to do. But by being attacked countless times, by being pushed right to the edge of everything that I can handle countless times in this life, I eventually got to a point where I was like, wait a minute, this just doesn't make sense. Like, okay, like everything's out to get me. It's all, but it can't be. And so I got to a point where I was like, what happens if I trust this? What happens if I embrace it? What if I take a radical step and actually start loving my worst enemy? And somehow I just found it within me to be able to do that. And when I did that, my worst enemy was never my worst enemy. It was just a limit of habitual perception that was keeping me confined into a certain parameter of reality that I could only break through by being attacked or being, polarized by some aggressive force or something like that. But through that, going through that thing, and because when you retract in fear, you're going to keep perpetuating experiences that are going to bring that up. But when you embrace it, the opposite happens. You open up, you expand, you go to a different level or a dimension of your perceptual possibility. And then you're ready for the next initiation or the next thing that happens.
Right.
Because it's no longer, you're not afraid anymore. You're like, okay, it was tough. It was brutal. It didn't feel good. But now I know that it's this greater energy that's really trying to get me to grow. And I've been resisting it because everybody I know resists it. And I'm done with that game. I'm done playing that game.
Right. Getting out of the duality and the definition of things. And just recognizing that these catalysts bring more of you out. It can help a person to actually thrive instead of be crushed and feel because it just gets worse because we're really here. I mean, wouldn't you say nature and just universal forces are encoded with helping us to become masters? Like,
absolutely. It's in fact, that's more of a reality, like times infinity. That's more of a reality than this limited, temporary, habituated human perception that most of us have accepted as reality. These codes, these frequencies ad infinitum are really what makes up the bulk of all reality. But in our limited, conditioned state of being and state of mind and state of heart, we just don't see it because we're too stuck in these perceptual prisons, believing that we're a victim, separate in all time and space, believing that everybody and everything is out to get us, and that there's more chaos and disorder and hardship in the world than there is coherence and order and harmony.
Right. And then people turn on each other. Exactly. Just like, because that all creates just almost a survival response. And
that's exactly what it is. You just nailed it. We become addicted to the chemical hormones that our bodies produce as a result of living in these states of fight or flight. And most of us live like that our entire lives. And because the feelings of stress are so intense, it becomes the most predominant thing in our state of awareness. And so we unconsciously go about recreating situations so that our body can create those stress hormones so that we can consciously and unconsciously feed off the addiction that feeling represents. Wow. And so when we're living in that state of being, producing that fight or flight stress hormones, what do you think our energy field is going to represent? What kind of signature is it going to hold? We're going to keep attracting whatever level of energy we embody and emit.
Oh, totally. Wow. And so it, must connect to adrenaline then, but not well directed. It's like energy channeled into more the drama and conflict, then adrenaline connected to maybe doing some great sport or doing something daring, that pushes the limits in a healthy way. That probably doesn't burn out the body and the adrenal glands. And so do you agree? I mean, I don't want to just.
No, I absolutely agree. But it's like we've got it backwards where stress response is healthy. We need it. We need it for where we're at. And again, it's not not to get in this idea of it's one or the other, because it's not about that at all. And that just puts us into more polarization and more duality. But what it's more about is coming to a healthy state of balance where it isn't one or the other. It's this 0 point, it's this balance between it all that allows us to have a state of being where we're able to perceive ourselves in an observational perspective that doesn't limit us, but that also allows us to evolve through this human experience. Because it's not about rising above it and ascending and being done with this necessarily. It might be for some, but it's about finding this balance point so that we are evolving. We are evolving as souls and as humans, but we're doing it in a way that is healthy, that is activating our joy, our love for life, our trust for life. And most of us have it backwards. We're everybody I know, successful people, unsuccessful people, even most of the happy people I know are living in a constant state of fight or flight. So that's the first step, is to reverse that by getting into a coherent space. Then when you've habituated yourself to being in a heart, coherent space, your body starts getting used to like, oh, wow, this actually feels good. I feel good. I remember what it's like being a child and having awe and wonder and being like, oh my God, everything is possible. And that's how we really are. And we really have the potential to be. And that's actually more normal and healthy for us than the opposite of what has happened. But it's almost the same story anywhere you look. We all have this awe and wonder, unless, the poor children who've been abused and stuff right from early in childhood. But most of us experience the awe and wonder and innocence of being a child. And when we're in that state of being, we're in alignment, we're in coherence with our body, and our body is functioning in a way that it has the potential to. But then something happens, and it could be, it's different for all of us. I got bullied. That's what happened for me. I got really severely bullied, and it traumatized me so much that I wasn't able to think or feel greater than that level of trauma that inflicted me. And so the awe and innocence and the wonder that I felt prior to that wasn't accessible to me, because the feeling of trauma and the stress hormones that my body was pumping through me was more intense than anything I had known prior to that. And so I just hadn't cultivated. And see, this is the beautiful part about it. Like, people might be like, oh, okay, so then these states of joy and happiness or whatever that we're feeling aren't as powerful as the stress hormones that we feel. But it's actually not true. It's the opposite. It's that we haven't cultivated them to the potential that they have the potential to be cultivated to. And that's the difference. And that's why I mentioned to you that the human body is essentially an organic, a bioelectric technology that we don't even know the potential of, but that when we intentionally activate and start generating feelings from our, just same way that when we experience trauma or resistance to something in our external world, when we intentionally choose to generate feelings of wholeness, wellness, love, joy, awe, wonder, and we keep training ourselves to produce those feelings inside of us, those feelings lead to greater feelings. They lead to feelings that there aren't even words to describe. And that is what brings us closer to this perceptual ceiling that many of us are stuck under, that keeps us feeling separate in space and time.
Seems like what you just described is like the root of addiction, sort of the fear that can't be activated organically. And so one has to find a crutch to release the stress. And then that ends up being, and you experienced, some addiction in your life, and even a chronic illness for more than a decade. So tell us a little bit about your healing process, and when you see kind of the world around you on a collective level with this sort of pandemic, what that metaphor is for the collective, as far as our growth period as a collective and what the initiation for humanity is. But that's two questions in one. So let's start with your healing journey when it comes to addiction. And if, what I just said feels like, accurate to what you said about that crutch when you aren't sure that those positive energies are going to fire, that a person, because they've experienced so much trauma, will turn to a substance instead. But if they can let go of it, it's like, right, it returns eventually. It's almost like an atrophied muscle you just have to exercise.
Yeah, you're exactly spot on. So as a result of the bullying and all the stuff that I went through, and actually getting really activated through near-death experiences and realizing how powerful I have the potential to be, that all of us have the potential to be, I, at that point in my life, didn't want to take responsibility for what I thought it meant to live as a divine being, to live as a holy person. I had my own pre-stigmatized beliefs around it and thought that I had to be a certain way in order to uphold the integrity of what that represented in my mind. And I didn't want that responsibility. So I looked for ways to numb myself out, because to live as a truly fully activated divine being in human form, to me at that point, represented something that was scary to me. You know, it was scary. It was like, I felt like I want to be human. I want to be in this body. I want to feel this material reality that I think I'm living in. And I got really addicted to heroin, really severely addicted to it, because it was, you know, all the other, I did a whole bunch of other drugs before that, but none of them did anything. Like they worked, believe me, they definitely had an effect, but they didn't get rid of the trauma that I felt from bullying, and they didn't numb down the potential or the activation that I had also experienced through these near-death experiences. But heroin was the first thing that actually numbed it down. And it made me feel human for the first time in a long time, which is so ironic, you know? But my God, what a dark road. What a horrible thing to go down, because the effects that you feel of numbing yourself and being in your body, I mean, when you first start doing it, your body just starts violently vomiting, you know, and you like, but it's a very human thing. Like you feel very in your body and very grounded. But when I started watching my friends around me die, when I started having really severe overdoses and realizing like, oh my God, this isn't just numbing out my ability to perceive at greater levels, it's going to kill me. Then I had to make a decision. And the decision was, I'm going to stop this, and I'm just going to totally kick it, and I'm not going to do it again. And I'm going to start taking responsibility for what I know I will never ultimately be able to escape from anyway. And that's what I did. You know, I kicked the habit, I kicked using it. It took me a few times, but when I finally did, I stopped using, and I started training myself in the ways that we talked about. And that's what enabled me to get through the severity of it. And, you know, it wasn't just heroin, it was crystal meth, it was cocaine, it was a mess. It was really severe.
So when you finally, when you just said you knew it was going to kill you and you started to heal and rehabilitate, was that before or after the 12-year kind of chronic illness thing, or was it all kind of in the same?
That was before. So here's what's interesting. So after I got clean and realizing how close to death I actually was, like how I almost literally killed my physical body, I started getting into health. I started getting into yoga and meditation, like all these things that I still love and I'm into, but don't necessarily identify with. I started getting into all these things and practicing them, but the whole time I wasn't taking responsibility for what I ultimately knew I had to take responsibility for, because I still had preconditioned belief systems around what it meant to be a truly activated being. And even though I knew deep down that the universe is a perfect accounting system and that there's no escaping ultimately what we have incarnated to become, I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready to actually be what I knew was unavoidable anyway. And so the mind or the ego or who we believe ourselves to be has this really peculiar way of seeking out things to feed this chemical addiction that's also connected to our belief systems, you know, the stress response that's very tied into our belief systems, in order to keep us from being at the cutting edge of our own evolutionary impulse. And most of us go through life doing this or finding ways to do it till we die. That's how most of us live our lives. I knew that there was no other way for me. I knew that ultimately I had to face this, I had to take responsibility for it, and I had to practice what I preach in order to truly be free, you know, what I would label as freedom. So the sickness, the prison, all that stuff was just a result of me not taking responsibility for what I knew I had to take responsibility for. And so the universe, or this greater coherent consciousness, was just like, okay, I'm going to keep knocking at your door. I'm going to keep doing everything that I can to get your attention, because you're the one who wanted to do this in the first place, you know? And that's ultimately what it is. Like, I remembered ultimately that I wanted to totally awaken and live at that level of integrity. And I held myself to that standard. And so all it's doing is keeping us in check with what we ultimately want for ourselves, if we even remember that.
Right. You're saying that all these different adversities, and I mean, it's messages that can only get our attention if it comes in the form of just some sort of adverse. Yeah, I not to use the word adversity twice, but like an adverse situation is going to get your attention. Pain is going to get your attention. And really, when it gets your attention, all it wants is to be set free. All it wants is love, right? Or, I mean,
Essentially,
yeah.
Because our greatest nightmare is this energy. It's this force just trying to get our attention. And when we can face a 10,000-eyed monster right in all of its eyes and be like, go ahead, frickin' kill me, like, take me. I am not afraid of you. You can do whatever you want, but I am not going to give you the most sacred aspect of my being, because it's not yours to take. And I love you. And when you can stand in that place that is within all of us, and you can truly confront the fear of your fears from that place, it's amazing how quickly those fears suddenly turn into butterflies or whatever you like. They turn into something that is very opposite of what it presented itself to be.
Right. It's almost like facing the fragmented aspects of ourself on the outside, the dark places in us that we need to confront outside of ourselves, the wounded child, the past life traumas or whatever. And when we confront it, we have a choice in that moment. Are we going to reject that part of ourselves, or are we going to integrate it? Right. Is that kind of what you're saying?
It's exactly it. It's exactly it. And who knows, it might go on forever, you know, but you don't care. Like, just because you've reached a certain level of evolutionary awareness, or whatever you want to call it, it doesn't mean that you're not going to continue facing things that you don't like. It just means that you're enabled to face things at a greater capacity or a greater amplitude than what you were previously used to. And that, there's many different reasons or ways of looking at that. But ultimately, it's like there's this greater evolutionary force, this impulse that has imagined all of this into existence, you could say. And we have somehow voluntarily separated ourselves from it so that it can re-experience the essence of what it truly is through us. And we prevent or enable that process with our willingness. And when we allow it to happen and we enable it to happen, then we grow and it grows, and this greater evolutionary impulse comes out of it that, for all we know, may have never existed anywhere in any dimension, in any space or time ever, for all we know. So even though it's not the process of being birthed or rebirthed or born isn't comfortable, it's necessary for the greater evolutionary impulse of the entirety of this force that is unifying all of us.
Yeah, I love just the way you put things. It's really, really great. And I mean, here we are in our world facing this pandemic. I mean, how do you personally make sense out of the artificial component of what you're seeing, the human level on a collective level of what you're seeing as far as these sort of new world order agendas breathing down our neck? You know, how would you describe the growth period for humanity and what we're facing and what that's here to teach us? And I know there's the individual because it is personal, but kind of as a maybe species, like how do you interpret this for yourself when you look at what's going on in the world?
So I'm very much into Rupert Sheldrake's theory of morphogenic fields and the 100th monkey effect. It's the same thing. We as a species have collectively and generationally evolved with such a limited perception of who and what we are that we have almost empowered these quote unquote negative forces to exist and have the power over us that they do, because it's by empowering them that we are offered the opportunity to be controlled, to be instilled with fear, to have all the things that we don't want to have happen to us, that we deeper down ultimately know we have to have happen to us in order for us to wake up at a level way greater than we could ever begin to imagine. And so in many ways, we have enabled or empowered all of this to go on to the degree that it's like a runaway train, right? And it's just going to keep happening, and it's always going to keep happening until we as individuals wake up to this force that is animating us, that's gifting us the opportunity to live. And when enough of us choose that we're done with this, we don't care, like literally energetically stand up to this stuff and be like, we are not going to allow you to do what you think we're doing. And you know what? You can kill us, you can do whatever you want to us, but we are something that you cannot kill. We are something that is so much greater than all of your fear and darkness and incoherence could ever comprehend. And no matter what you think you're doing to us, you're not doing that, because we truly are that. So when we get into that space, then that is how that will change. And when enough of us get into that personal place of coherence, then we begin to activate that 100th monkey effect, where like Roger Bannister in the 4-minute mile, like nobody believed it was possible. Then he broke the 4-minute mile and suddenly tons of people were able to do it. It's the same thing with this. When an individual starts choosing to consciously become coherent with the energy that is animating their being to the degree that their entire being is in harmony and in coherence with this energy, then all these dormant energy centers that are all through our body and all around our body, they start to become activated just as a result of us choosing to dwell in this coherent field long enough. When enough of us do that as individuals, then it's going to make it so much easier for many others to do it. And that level of coherence, personal coherence, starts to become entrained with global coherence. And global coherence is entrained with universal coherence. And it just keeps going greater and greater to the source of all this, where it actually comes from. So when we as individuals do this, and we choose to do it, then it's almost like none of that stuff even really exists anyway. It just seems like it because we're so addicted to believing it to be that way. But it's not going to change until we choose to break that habit.
Right. And you've lived a life journey that's very much the micro, macro, just seeing what you've gone through, how it shifted your world and how that also feeds into the collective, because we meet somewhere in the unified field, I suppose. And everybody's individual process, looking at what's going on in the outer world as an opportunity, like you took with adversity and illness and being in jail and all these different things that you went through, to have it awaken you and open you up. Say a bunch of people are doing it and we don't reach critical mass. Do you feel there's a timeline split? Do you feel like those that are finding a level of self-mastery, I guess, for lack of a better word, are going to branch off into their own timeline? I know that's almost predictive and there's some mysteries maybe we can't solve, but do you feel that an individual that has this figured out is at the mercy of those who don't when it comes to a planetary system or a humanity?
To a degree, yeah. I mean, again, it comes back to whatever perceptual ceilings are encompassing that individual. But the more you break out of those ceilings, the more aware of it you become, the less controlled by it you are, because you're no longer living from a dense state of illusory material reality, and you're living much more in alignment with the harmonic convergence, the reality of what this force is that is imagining all of this into existence. And so in that regard, we've already won. Like, we've already won. This has already been decided, but it wouldn't be any fun to do that because there wouldn't be any opportunities for growth. So we got to play along with the drama. We got to play along with it. We got to like really get into it and really play our roles and live it out and just be a part of it, because that's how we grow. That's how this evolves. That's how it turns into what it can be. I mean, yeah, I could sit back and stay in a cave and just be totally content with my own level of development and not feel like I need to do anything. But it just wouldn't be playful of me to do that. It wouldn't be fun. It wouldn't, like, come on, like, we are changing ourselves and we are changing reality as a whole as we know it. And we are doing it in alignment with a force that is so much greater than the most appeared evil and darkest forces that we perceive with our human senses on this planet.
Oh gosh, and when you said that, I just had this image of like, you know, somebody with a vaccine in their hand, and it's just like,
yeah,
it's just so, it's so minuscule compared to our greater potential. And we expand these things and have them take over our reality. And this is really nudging us in the right direction if we can look at it in that way. And that's what the wisdom of your journey is all about, right?
That's exactly what it is. And again, like, see, like, you're smiling now and you're like it wants, there's like this point where, because when we perceive it according to the way we've always perceived it, it's very heavy, it's very serious, it's very scary, it's very dense, it's very something that we don't want to even think about. And so we try to ignore it or try to act like it's not going on, or, you know, hence why I said that the collective wake-up call is not collective, it's personal. People feel like, oh, okay, others are dealing with this. Like, there's people out there who are dealing with this, so I don't have to deal with it. Many people will do that. They don't want to take responsibility for how they perceive all this because it's very dense, it's very scary, it's very heavy. But that's the thing, like, it's only like that when we feed that kind of energy into it. And hence, returning to that state of innocence, of awe, of wonder, and most of us know that state. Most of us do. Yes, it's awful. Tons of terrible children have been abused and all that, and maybe they didn't get to experience that. But most of us know what it's like to feel joy, to smile, to be happy, to feel love in the world for somebody or for something. And that is the state of joy, of awareness that we have the opportunity to return to now. And one of the best ways to do that is to have this playful, not so serious attitude. Like, everybody I know is so damn serious, and I get it. I get why. I used to be the same way. Like, it's some serious shit going on, right? But that's even more of a reason to not be serious. That's even more a reason to lighten up and get playful and start being like, you know what, like, like, this looks awful, but I know it's not. Like, look at behind you, look at that tapestry, like, look at where we are, you know, where, like, if you put it into perception, we're on a blue-green living rock that is floating in the middle of a solar system, that's in a galaxy, that's in a universe, that's in a I mean, it's like this fractal reality that is incomprehensible to our preconditioned, stressed out human self, that we just totally bought right into the whole illusion of it all, to the degree that we think it's real and we keep perpetuating it, never even knowing that we are the only thing. It's that separate sense of self is the only thing that prevents us from just being like, I'll tell you what, all the drugs, all the everything that I've ever done, and all the peak experiences that I've had on it, and I've had some really peak experiences doing drugs, nothing compares to what it feels like when it really happens to you. When you really let go from a human level and you start attuning your human perception to this incomprehensibly beautiful, magnificent energy that is animating your being, and you feel what it's like for that energy to just open up all the channels of your body and just come into you and light you up. There's nothing in the world that feels like that. And there's nothing that can take that away from us. It's the most empowering. It's strange at first, like when it happens, like we resist. That process wants to happen to us constantly, but we're so conditioned in so many ways that are so generational that we don't even realize the barriers of resistance that we put up to this greater force that wants to literally enlighten us. And so we live our lives just constantly putting up barriers to it. So it has to do things like form an elite and form, you know, all these things that we see around us, you know, that are taking away. Like, it has to do all these things to try to get us to wake up to what is really going on, because we're stuck on the particle. We're focusing in quantum physics, we're focusing on the particle, not the wave. Okay, we're focusing on the little pebble on the beach when there's an entire ocean around it. And when we make that reversal in perception, then everything makes sense. Like everything, you know, and that's why I said before, we've already won, you could say. Like, this has already been decided. It's already done.
Right.
But it just wouldn't be any fun to.
Yeah, just go claim it and not be a part of this. I mean, it's almost like the things that threaten to enslave us are the things that can set us free. If we can understand it's showing up to remind us that we're still holding on to something, and that might be very unconscious, maybe in an ancestral pattern, maybe some societal programming, a childhood wound, whatever, that these things are coming to threaten us, so that we look inside and say, why would I comply? And if I have to fight against it, do I need to fight, or can I do what you did in the face of the worst of the worst in the jail cell, right? And then it starts to change, the energy starts to change. And am I right in how I interpreted that?
You're spot on. It's exactly what it is. Like, we are, and this is so much deeper. It goes so much more beneath the surface of what we appear to be viewing with our normal senses. And all the things that appear to be happening in the world around us are much deeper. I don't want to use the word, but I will, because I don't know what else to say. You could say they're almost karmic patterns. It's an energy of stagnation that has been stuck within the genetics of our species for countless generations, to the degree that we have so deeply and thoroughly bought into this illusory reality and accepted it to be the only reality, that we have enabled it to go on for as long as it appears to have gone on. And we can change that really fast if we want.
Yes, absolutely. Oh my gosh, right.
But we love the drama, right? We love the drama. Like, we love,
right,
people
right.
do, they love it. They're addicted to it.
Yeah. Right. And when we can raise the vibration of changing it out of the addiction, and engage, you know, our minds. Like we like to solve puzzle, we like the challenge, we like, you know, sort of the drama, but the drama can be, you know, sailing in really windy weather instead of getting caught in a lower sort of conflict with family and friends because you don't think the same, right? Is that kind of what you mean?
You're absolutely. I mean, look, we are where we are because that is essentially where we have evolved to be. It's what our particular energetic signature has gone through and developed as and manifested as at this point in perceived time. But it's within our ability to literally make a quantum jump out of these evolutionary limitations that have brought us to this point, and the circumstances of the reality that we all find ourselves in right now are spurring us on. They're egging us on. They're really doing everything they can to get as many of us to take that quantum leap as possible. And you know what? It's already happening, and it's just going to keep happening. And holy crap, what an exciting time to be alive.
I'm so thrilled that you reached out to, or that we made this connection. I can't even remember how it magically.
Nina Starsong is who made this connection.
Right. So, I mean, I really relate to everything you're saying, and it's not just, oh, I relate. I mean, these are universal laws and principles, almost like the true physics of consciousness and how energy works, how it interacts with the physical plane from the non-interference zone of mind control and frequency distortions and this and that. And we can reach into that despite all these dark technologies, even if they get worse, right? Do you feel?
Absolutely. Like the more you surrender into the possibilities that you're not even able to comprehend, the more those possibilities start to, I don't want to use the word infiltrate, the more they trickle down into all of these perceptual limits that you have evolved with, that have brought you to this point, that empower you. They enable you to move beyond all of it. Like none of it has any power over us unless we stay in a place where we're afraid of it. And most people are just going to remain in that state because they can't even imagine what this greater ocean actually is. But I'll tell you what, some of us are diving in head first, and we've already made up our minds. Like we're going for it. We know why this is happening. We don't know all the reasons why, but we feel this greater evolutionary impulse and we trust what is on the other side of it. And by doing that, by making that greater sacrifice, you call it, which is another terrible word to use, but essentially by sacrificing all of our fear-based perceptions of self and reality into this great unknown, we bring that great unknown. We give that great unknown permission to come into this world through our perception of self. And oh my God, once we've opened up those doorways and it comes in, you know, and that's the kind of like, I don't want to say sad because none of it's sad. None of it is anything that we think it is. But when I feel this stuff and I feel this force moving through me, and it makes me cry every time. Like I can break down and cry because there's nothing more powerful and more beautiful than it. But for a moment, I kind of get a little sad where I'm like, geez, like look at us as a species. Like we're stuck, like scrambling around, chasing our tails, like yelling at each, like all this stuff, doing terrible things to each other. And when really, if we were aware of what we actually are and what is actually happening, imagine what we could be creating right now as individuals, as groups, as communities, as a species. Like the potential of this is like, you know, it's awful. Like it's, and
we haven't even,
that's why I said like, the reason I have moments where I get kind of sad, but then I come right out of it because I'm like, oh yeah, that's that preconditioned stuff where even as much as you evolve, even as far as you go, there's still going to be limits. There's still going to be ceilings that, you know, you have to break through, because everything that is happening to us is a deeper soul aspect. It's another fragmented aspect of our perception of self that we have lost along the trail and pathway of time, of evolution through our human journeys, through our plant journeys, through our animal journeys. We've all been everything in every form. And within us is the memory of what it is to come from source, to come out of source, to go into dense physical material separation, and to live in that perceived state of separation for countless, quote unquote, years in perceived human time. So we know what that's like. And we have come to a place in our human perception where we're ready. We're ready to be like, okay,
yeah,
it's time to be done with that. And
yeah,
it's time to call the potential back.
yeah, and not be siphoned off of. I mean, you know, a parasitic system can only exist if it has a host. So we got to stop being the host, right? And you said some really awesome things, and it just reminded me of, you know, when I see like a weapon or like chemtrails or just something that's been weaponized, I try and remind myself that that's a tool for my healing, because it's reminding, you know, it's like, I mean, we're alchemists. We can change things through perception. We give things meaning way more than it needs to define us, right? Do you think?
Absolutely, like a bazillion infinite percent. But think about how, like, what a radical concept that is for most people, right? Because they're perceiving things according to the way they've always perceived them. So they're perceiving things in a very three-dimensional or a very limited perception of reality that they have both consciously and unconsciously accepted as normal. And so to embrace these things that are trying to antagonize and that we think are hurting us as something that is a tool for our evolutionary development is like, holy freaking crap. Like, where do we even begin with that, right? But you know what? Baby steps, because we are truly just innocent children, all of us. Even those guys in jail, like, you know, who are doing terrible things. They're like, by all of society's standards, by anybody's standards, they're awful, right? As we would judge them. But they're not. They're just a part of this greater experience that is working out the kinks of itself through all of us. And we have both willingly and unwillingly chosen to partake in all of this.
Really, really great words. I just have one more question. One of the most common things that I hear from people: how do I wake my friends and family up, right? So it's like a lot of what you were sharing, especially the toughest of the ones in jail that are the worst of the worst, the fact that they could change, the fact that you could see innocence in their eyes because you shifted, right, within you. Would you say that that applies to people who want to wake their family up, instead of the fighting, instead of the feeling judged or misunderstood, that you find this whole other zone? So can you just kind of talk to that about waking up other people, feeling frustrated that their friends and family don't understand and they're being called crazy? Like, and I know you've shared so much of this wisdom already in the interview, but just to put it in the context of people wanting to wake up others around them, which for some have to realize that somebody else's awakening might not look like yours, right?
Yeah. Who I think Ram Dass or somebody, and again, I don't read much. I'm not really much of a reader. I don't really pay a lot of attention to things around me because I've been in so many situations where I've had to focus on things inside of me. But I think Ram Dass or somebody said something to the effect of, if you think you're enlightened, try spending a week with your family. Said something like that.
Yeah, I've heard that. That's a good one.
But again, what this all comes down to is, how much are you taking responsibility for what you bring to the table? How much are you choosing to be in an unconditional state of internal coherence? Because the more you choose to do that, the more you choose to habituate that, the more you start to override your normal stress responses to reality, your normal thoughts, behaviors, and actions, and the way you're most used to interacting with others in the world. If you're interacting with others in the world and you're trying to change them and you're like doing all this stuff, you're in the past. You're in your own past conditioning. You're in your own past belief systems, and you're not doing the work that you may not even know you're capable of doing. And that's always what it comes down to. Because when you get into a state of coherence, personal coherence, heart-brain coherence, whole body coherence, which then turns into like a whole soul coherence. When you get into that state, coherence resonates or vibrates at a frequency that is so much higher than incoherence. That incoherence has no choice but to be entrained by something that is truly generating coherent energy. Because when we turn on all those aspects of those, for most of us, dormant aspects of our mind and body, we become a source of free energy, literally. And when we become that, and we are like, okay, not only do I know it's there, because a lot of people have a feeling that it's there, but the ones who have been like, you know what, I am getting the heck out of the way, and I am going to let this force that I know to be the one that gives birth to universes manage the details of my life, then it does. And when it does, you start creating an energy, and you can't help, though others around you can't help but feel it. Because again, coherence entrains incoherence, but it's up to us to do the work. And so if things aren't looking too good around us, all it means is that we just have more work to do, because we love the drama and we love the addiction to this human story that we're all a part of. And we're just so bought into it that we love it and are more addicted to it than we love the source of what we actually are, of what we actually come from. And so our task then, if we want to move beyond such limitations, is to start training ourselves into these coherent states of being that we all actually are and have the potential to be, because it's all that's going on anyway.
Right, and you said it far exceeds any experience you've ever had on drugs. Just that feeling once you get there, once you give it time, and it really doesn't take that long. I mean, the healing process really doesn't take that long if there's consistency. I mean, things can accelerate so quickly just with a shift of perception. And I just want to make sure that I ask if there's anything that we weren't able to cover, or that I didn't ask you, or that you weren't able to bring up, that you want to share now before we close. I'm just so blown away. I've just enjoyed this conversation so much. It's actually hard to break away, but I know that when they go for Tammy, we'll definitely have to do something like this again. But yeah, anything that you want to make sure that you share that we didn't get a chance to share?
Yeah, well, first of all, this can go on forever, because it actually is forever. And that's the reality of it. So we're there, we're part of it. But yeah, I want to encourage everybody on this planet who feels constrained by the effects of this pandemic and everything that's happening to us, that we perceive as happening to us as a result of it, to really tap into the part of themselves that can somehow trust what's happening, that can somehow know that, you know what, I don't like it, but what if there was a part of me that trusts it and could love it? And what would that feel like? What would that be like? Start working your contemplative centers. You know, so many of us are so stuck in these hormones of stress that we're in the lower parts of our body, the survival parts of our body, but from our heart up are the more contemplative glands and energy centers and plexuses of our entire body that for most of us are very inactive, but they become activated by our willingness to activate them. And we do this by first getting into our heart, hence heart-brain coherence, because the heart is in the middle of these energy centers. So when we get into that heart space, then suddenly we're not as afraid of all these things that are out to get us. And the more we develop that heart awareness, and I always give this, it's such a crude example, but it's such a good one. Do we have a minute more?
Yeah.
Okay. I love it. I love it because it's so crude, but so many people get it. Like, if you've ever had a sexual fantasy about somebody and you imagine what it's like to be with that person, and you like imagine, you get right into it, and you're thinking about it, just the act of envisioning that or imagining what it might be like to be with that person causes a physiological response in the body. We all know what happens. All the blood and energy goes to our private spots, and we become prepared to do whatever happens next from that point, which everybody knows. But what a lot of people don't realize is that we have the same potential or ability to envision possibilities from all these different parts of our body. Like in your heart, like, what would it be like to love this world, to love all the things that I'm afraid of, and like get right into it, like really like get totally lost in the daydream, use your imaginative capabilities, like really try to like imagine like what would it be like to love the things that are so unlovable and hard to love. What would it really feel like to do that? And in the same way that your sexual organs get turned on, your heart will, all that energy will go to your heart. It will enlarge and it will start creating feelings that are in alignment with your imaginative capabilities. Same thing goes through your throat. All your, like, what would it be like to speak my truth, to feel so whole and complete that I could fearlessly and shamelessly stand up in front of the entire world and speak what I ultimately know to be true. You know, you can do this in every single part of your body and activate all of these dormant aspects of your entire being. And the more you do that internally with all these parts of your body, then you start doing it to the actual field of energy that is around you. Hence all these light workers and all these, like, there's a lot of people who are working with these codes and the energetic frequencies that are around their body. And in many ways, a lot of those people, or some of them anyway, they've done this highly developed internal work of their body. And so they're able to carry a greater frequency potential into their bodies, into this life, and activate these dormant aspects that are innate in their actual energy field itself.
And do you feel, oh, that's brilliant. Do you feel that is capable of transmuting the stuff that we're breathing in, the toxicity, the dark weaponry, even if somebody had a vaccine and then all of a sudden said, what have I done? Do you feel that there is no true enslavement? It just lasts as long as it takes to just pull yourself back? And that's my last question. I could just keep talking.
Think about how hard to accept that would be for most people. Like most people would never on their best day want to accept that as a possibility, because that would mean surrendering the victimization that the ego has held onto for countless generations. And what we're seeing on this earth right now with all this war and strife and conflict and incoherence is individuals unconsciously holding on to the development of their own egoic traits more than the potential of their soul through their body. People will fight and kill each other over defending what their ego has evolved with through countless generations. So from that perspective, it is pretty heavy.
Right.
You know?
So for some, it's a reality that they can't really be shaken from, but if they get like assimilated into the AI more and they start to lose even more of themselves, I mean, I guess that's just their free will choice to not recognize their potential. I mean, they must come back around or have that opportunity.
Everything that we perceive with our normal human senses, including the AI, including everything, is enveloped within a container of something that we can't even comprehend. But it's definitely organic in nature. It's definitely a living geometric entity. It's a field that is highly intelligent, that is self-evolutioning. It is evolving itself through all of this. And when we get beyond who we believe ourselves to be and how all of this appears to be, then we start to activate the part of ourself that is already a part of this greater being that is doing what it's doing. And none of what we think is happening to us here is happening to us anymore.
It's just so incredible because you have the real life experience. What you share comes from real direct experience. You've put out so much. You've got all these great websites and this book. And just maybe before we close, tell us a little bit maybe about that and where we can find you. And I just want to say I'm so grateful that you came on. I mean, people are going to listen to this. It's just like it is like the best medicine right now. And I wow.
I
It's
know.
amazing. Yeah.
Thank you. And look, like that's when, like, all these things that I speak of are things that were taught to me and that I learned by going through things that I shouldn't have survived through, things that most of my friends didn't survive through. And I went through all of this because this part of me was so alive and well, and it wanted me to experience the polarity and the duality and all that, so that I was better able to understand the human condition for where we're at right now. Because I truly believe that those of us who are going through these really difficult things are doing it to lighten up the load for the rest of us. Because everything that I've shared and that we've talked about and exchanged here, like, it actually isn't that big a deal. It's the biggest deal, but it seems like it's a big deal for somebody who's just so enveloped in this 3D reality. So that book I wrote when I was incarcerated, and I never intended to publish it or put it out into the world. I wrote it as a way, it was like one of the first coping mechanisms that I had when I went to prison. You know, I was like, what do I, like, I'm in prison. I've been taken out of reality and put in a place. You know, I grew up in the woods of Maine. You know, I was living off the land. I was like, prison was not my place, you could say, you know? So I was shocked. I was traumatized by it. But I've had so much trauma throughout my entire life that I have been able to develop these coping mechanisms and skills to bounce back and be resilient in the face of it. And every time it's the same thing that I've been sharing all night, is that it's this greater force trying to work itself through us. So my first instinct was like, okay, I got to write out my entire life story so I can look for patterns of limiting beliefs that would cause me to end up in a prison. And sure enough, right away, I started seeing these patterns. And I was like, oh my God, like, it was so obvious, but I had never looked at it from such an observational perspective. And plus it was very cathartic because I was getting all of this past stuff out of me and putting it on paper and like getting it out and pushing it away. And it was 1,050 handwritten pages. It was this big, huge thing. And I let a few people in there read it because people have plenty of time in there and they just are looking for things to do. And they were like, you have to put this out. Like, this could change the world. And I'm like, and back then I'm like, no way. Like, it's so personal, you know, but they just kept pushing me and pushing me. And so then I let other people read it and they were like, same thing. Everybody's like, you got to put this out there. This is a true medicine story. It is something that can transform human consciousness because it represents, as you said earlier, it's like the microscopic and the macroscopic elements of the human journey as we go through this journey of separation and reconnect to what we ultimately are. And so I wrote it, it's a memoir, but I wrote it from a observational perspective so that it's about you, the reader, so that it's about us, the collective. And I just did that naturally. I didn't plan on doing it. It wasn't like, it just came out like that because it was like this greater thing that I was tapping into that was enabling me to write it like that, you know? And when I got out of prison, Eckhart Tolle's publishing company found it. They found out about me through random people and they were like, let's see what we want to hear, you know? And they were like, oh my God, this is going to be huge. We're going to publish it and blah, blah, blah. But they're like, you don't have a social media platform. And it's like, well, yeah, I've been in prison. Like I wasn't focusing on building social media, you know? But that ended up not happening just because I didn't have a platform. And I wasn't ready at that point anyway, because I knew that to put this book out there, I had to truly be a living example of everything that it represented. And so I have just been doing this work. I have been working on myself. I've been facing all the things that nobody wants to face, because I know what's on the other side of it. And I know that for me to not do that would be me letting everybody and everything down around me. And I've got way too much integrity to do that. Like, I love us. I love all of us. I love what we have the potential to be. And when I see people beginning to feel what it is they truly are and how it enables them to live in a greater way and what we can potentially create from that place, I get excited. And I'm like, you know what? I'm the first to raise my hand to, like, okay, let's go through some brutal stuff, because you know what? I know what has the potential to come out of it. Now, I want to preface that with saying, like, I am looking for, and it's funny, I was talking about this with Nina, like, we're like, man, because she's been through a lot too. We're like, we're looking forward to new seasons, to brighter days. And we know they're possible. We know they're coming. Hence the necessity for people to take this stuff seriously, to put it into practice, and to do this work. Because yes, everything is what we've been talking about all night. It all is like that anyway. But for whatever reason, we have these deeper soul contracts, you could say. I don't like using all these buzzwords, but essentially that's what it is. There's some kind of unspoken, unconscious obligation to fulfill these karmic destinies that have been enacted and are playing out over trillions of human years, you could say, to the degree that it has brought us all to this point in time, here, now, where we have the potential to not only just awaken, but turn this into something that may never have existed in anywhere, in any place, in any time, in any dimension, anywhere. And that potential is what gets me excited. And if I may speak for the highest forces, I think it gets excited by that too.
Oh, that's
I say
incredible.
that humbly.
Oh, that's so awesome. Sometimes I look at it like a big game of lost and found, you know, just like, and then lost again. And there's so much, because we're so multidimensional, and there's so much, and yes, potential, and gosh, just not limiting ourselves to this, because this is what's closing us in our houses, right? It's time. And how incredible your words are. And I so appreciate you being here. And I look forward to creating more. And I just thank you so much for your time with me today.
Let's do it. Let's make this world what we know it can be, you know?
For sure. Well, thank you everybody for tuning in. I'll have all his info in the description. And gosh, I know everybody's going to walk away that much more invigorated and just I mean, it's just huge. So blessings to you, Seth.
Empower each other. We're here to wake each other up and encourage each other to stay that way, because we can eradicate the pain and suffering. We can live in a way that's beautiful, that's magnificent, that's in alignment with our potential.
Even with this craziness breathing down our neck, this is pushing us in the direction that you're talking about, if we allow it.
It's our best friend. It's true. And like, most people would be like, are you out of your mind? But
oh, I get it. No,
if we can connect to that part of us that's like, wow, like, it's our greatest teacher, it is our best friend, we'll see how quick things can change.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you so much, Seth. Okay. Bye, everybody.
Yes. Thank you, Laura. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, my pleasure. Okay.